Welcome to Progress in Practice, where we explore what it really takes to build and sustain a professional service business. The hard lessons, the smart moves, the uncomfortable truths. Because success leaves clues, if you're willing to look for them. I'm Charlie Redding. Let's dive in. So Annie, welcome to the Progress in Practice podcast. Really looking forward to chatting to you. Yeah, well, I know, obviously, we know each other well. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to you about business and in particular your business, because it's different to the sort of guests that we've had on the Progress in Practice podcast so far. So let's kick things off by, if you could explain, who do you serve? Who do you help? How do you help them? And what makes you different to other firms in your space?
Okay, so Allison Co is a sort of UK-based interior design studio, but we tend to specialize in sort of luxury residential sort of projects, both in the UK and also more recently down in overseas. So we're working quite a bit now in the south of France. So that's been a game changer for us and very exciting. I think what really makes us different is that as a company, we are about creating homes that feel really individual. So they're kind of all about sort of not just styling rooms, but understanding the architecture, the flow, the proportion, the function, and everything first. And so it's all about creating beautiful spaces, but really they have a purpose. They feel very much in line with our clients' sort of wishes and style. So there's just it's a very personal approach, I think, to the way that we work. And it's quite collaborative all the way through, which I think makes us really kind of hopefully quite unique. We're good listeners. We like working very transparently, and I think we bring very good value in what we do. So yeah.
So knowing what you've just done this amazing project in France that I've seen some other photos of. How would you describe what you just sort of put into words in terms of what you do differently? How would you describe, like, succinctly what you did for that project? So let's use that as an example to try and sort of put some meat on the bones there and say, what did they come in with and how did you execute their dreams? Not the kind of practicalities of it, but with that amazing project in France.
Well, I think first off, also it's myself and my husband, and we have also a young lady called Freya who works with us, and we all bring something quite particular to the party. My husband speaks very good French. When we first started the project, it was just initially me getting involved in the interiors side. However, the property was a real sort of shell. It had literally very few floors, a few walls. It was kind of like a shell. And in France, it's quite common for the architect to really drive the project. But with this, as we kind of got further into the whole sort of planning process, I realized quite quickly that there was something that my husband and I could bring together as a team to add more value, because a lot of things were being overpriced and weren't really moving forward. So we came in and took hold of the project, managed the budget, saved him an awful lot of money, well over €1 million, based on being able to communicate with people and find a very good team ourselves and sourcing and all those sorts of things, which made a massive difference to how quickly we get the project done and how we could execute it. And I think one of the biggest things we did was not just on the value side, but on the delivery side. So what was really stalling, it was very stop-start, partly because, and it wasn't entirely the architect's fault, it was also to do with the fact that the client was not based in the UK. So we were kind of the bridge between the builders and the clients. So we became the sort of guardians of the project essentially, and delivered it in a way that enabled the client not to have to get involved. There was no need for him to get involved because we were sort of the guardians, as it were. So if there was anything we needed to speak to them about, we could manage all of that and just literally get on with it without any sort of stalling. So in fact, we actually got the build, which is a 7-bedroom, 7-bathroom house, built in less than a year, finished, complete, ready to use, which was quite a feat, really. So I think that's what made us really kind of quite unique, in the sense that we do come, we're working with a British client in France. We have the ability to speak French, we can manage. We've got a very good team. We've worked out who the right people are to work with. We did a lot of research on quite a lot of the bits and pieces that we knew would save money. And we ended up delivering what was and is now a fabulous home. So it was a really
amazing.
Yeah, great.
Amazing. And it might be that I've just asked you to tell what I'm about to ask you next. So yeah, maybe the answer is that last story. But what story best explains why you do what you do? Is there a story that is kind of, why you set up this business, or why you've kind of ended up helping people now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always been a creative person. I mean, I think ever since I can remember, I've always been quite creative, and I always enjoyed art and always enjoyed fashion and style and all those sort of things. But when I started, it was my daughter who really kind of got me going and helped me realize my dream, because I started drawing again with her. And on the back of that, I then started creating wallpapers and fabrics. And then on the back of that, I got asked to work on small projects, which then kind of grew. And then obviously I have worked with my husband on developing our own projects. So we've got a lot of experience in the project management side as well. And my husband very much on the building side. So it was kind of, for me, what I love about it is the constant challenge, I suppose, of making something beautiful but personal to somebody. And I think that's always been an integral part of why I love what I do, because it's a personal journey, both for me and for the client, because I get to know them, and I love understanding what it is that they love and how I can execute that in a way that really speaks to them. And I think that for me is a really powerful thing.
Brilliant. And obviously, and one of the reasons why I know your work so well is because you did the hub and spoke for us. So
yes,
you
exactly.
created, and so I've witnessed you kind of taking my ideas and building them out into realities. So no, which is absolutely brilliant, and we love and loved what you did with the hub and spoke. So you've obviously built up quite a lot of experience now running this business, from small projects to really big projects in the south of France. If you could send your younger self, as you sort of started out this business, a memo, what would it say and why?
I tell you what it would say, and I've thought a lot about this actually. I think don't be afraid of failure. I think that's a really big one, because I think as you learn, you never have the answers to everything. And part of the journey is always being willing to learn from your mistakes and not being afraid to correct. You correct your mistakes, and you never do them. Invariably, you never do them again. So I think don't ever be afraid to try new things. I think the other thing is never to second guess yourself, because I feel like sometimes you always have the answer really deep down inside. So I think really follow your gut, because sometimes your gut will be the first thing. And sometimes you don't. I've been guilty of doing that in the past and then regretted it. And I always think really, really listen to your gut, because I think your gut is a really good guide to how you make decisions, whether, and making the right ones. So I think that's probably, for me, a really big one. So just sort of believe in yourself and always trust your gut.
And I think the failure thing is a really important thing, isn't it? Because particularly when you're running your own business, any business really, I think a good entrepreneur is somebody that continually tries things, and they fail at certain things, learn from it, and then try the next thing, which ultimately why people think that failure is the opposite of success, but actually it's just a stepping stone towards it. So
I think it's a really important part of learning, and I don't think anyone is perfect. Nobody gets it right all of the time. That's part of being just a human being. And I think accepting that and not trying to, always trying your best to do. And I live and die by the rule that you always do the absolute best you possibly can for your client. But sometimes there are going to be the odd mistakes that you make, and that doesn't mean, it's you can't say it. It just means you learn from it, and that is a really important thing. And I personally would always say to anybody, particularly my younger self, that don't always never ever be afraid of failure, because that is part of the learning process.
Brilliant advice. So if you could pass no money to your daughters, but instead just one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Okay, so I think the biggest piece of advice I would say to anyone, I've got two very different daughters, one that's very kind of clear on the path that she wants to follow, and the other one that really isn't. And I would say, don't ever feel you have to follow a well-traveled path to success. There is always be open to a number of different ways of finding your thing, because I'm slightly a testament to that. And that can sometimes, so I didn't do the traditional route. I wasn't the traditional route into interior design. It sort of kind of happened just holistically, almost just over the years. It kind of, I grew as a person, I grew as a designer, and I grew in terms of what I loved, and I'm focused on that. But it wasn't the traditional route. And so for me, I think sometimes that can often be your strength, because you're not always following the same path as everybody else. You're doing it your way. And by doing it your way, you give something, I think, exceptionally personal to the way that you approach work, life generally. Just think don't feel you have to do everything in a traditional way. You may go off, do something, and that might help you grow into sort of the next stage of your life, which will help you define, it just helps define you somehow. So my advice would be, don't worry if it doesn't fall in your lap straight away and you know exactly where you want to go. You find your way. Somehow you find your way and you end up doing, but the most important thing is always doing the thing that really you love. And if you can do what you love, then you'll be fine. Brilliant. You can't fail.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I think what also people miss is they think, so for example, if you'd gone off and done, interior design at university and then got a graduate work job in a bigger firm, and you'd have created something very different to what you've created now. And all of your experience that led up to you deciding to do this will have given you a different perspective from all of the other people that have done the traditional route, which means that you end up with a very different offering and a much wider range of experience. So I think that's
not wrong either.
Absolutely right.
That's absolutely not wrong. I mean, I'm not saying that's the way it worked for me. And I think that's just for those people that, do struggle with not necessarily knowing straight off the bat what they want to do, however they go about it. You always end up, if you follow what you really love, you always end up doing something well. I think if you try and force yourself to do something that doesn't suit you as a person or doesn't give you pleasure and joy, then I don't think you can ever deliver something as well as somebody who really loves and lives and breathes what they do.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what's the biggest obstacle that's blocking you achieving all of your goals at the moment? What's the single biggest obstacle?
Time. I think time and just sort of just people, because there are so many nowadays in business. I mean, I'm of a generation, obviously, where I'm not a natural kind of I'm not part of the social media kind of explosion, and I didn't grow up with it. So for me, it's a really difficult one to get my head around. But you always need more time, and you always need more people. And you would say, oh gosh, I need someone who could do that much better than I can, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really, I think, how best you utilize what you have. So I don't always have everything in order as a business to run a business, but I would love more time, and I love more people, because sometimes I feel I'm kind of doing so many different things, but it's just focusing. And this is where is focusing on the things that that will count. So rather than kind of getting too stressed about it, I think you just got to kind of work day to day, week by week. Sort of planning, I think, is probably the key thing. But I would love more time, and I would love more people if I could, more hands.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of founders listening to this resonating with that. I've heard a lot of time. I've heard founders saying, "I just need to clone myself. That's what I need from my." But actually, we've got with the Trusted Team, we've got an event later on in the year called the Time Poor Entrepreneur, or the Time Poor Entrepreneurial Evolution, or something like that. I can't remember the exact name, but I'll happily share that with you. Obviously, I'd love you to come along if you would like to, but I'll also put that in the show notes, because I think that you're absolutely right. There is this restriction on time, but ultimately it's about the business success is about getting rid of all of the things that aren't the kind of three main activities that make you, that A, you love, and B, you're really good at. And they're typically the three things that drive the most profit. So
Yeah.
it's then an exercise of kind of getting rid of everything else, which I appreciate is not necessarily easy, but obviously it's something that, helps the business evolve.
Yeah.
So I always ask people about books. It doesn't have to be a book. It might be a framework or a documentary or a mentor, but what book or something else has helped you on your journey, and where do you see it showing up in your business?
Well, I would say, having been a member of the trusted teams, I do think that has been quite inspiring, just because of the people that I'm been lucky enough to be a part of, because you tend to learn quite a lot from other people, other business entrepreneurs, you know, and I really think that's such a valuable tool, and to have that resource to hand if you've got a question or you're not sure about something, then there's this kind of wealth of knowledge that is kind of just there, apart from what you learn also,
Brilliant.
during the sessions. So I think that's been really great. I think for me, one of the things that I've learned the most as well, which literally goes back to what we've just been talking about, is the planning. Because I think the sort of, in my case, there's not really a leadership meeting, but that's what it's generally called. But I guess, because it's literally only three of us. So it's kind of small.
That's fine. That's what it has to be.
But just to have a regular sit down to go through things and plan things ahead, and almost kind of know, right, okay, this is what we need to be doing for this week or this month. And then also then trying to look ahead a bit to say, okay, where do we want to be in, by next quarter? What do we need to have done by then? What do we need to have done by the end of the year? All of that sort of thing, I think, is really useful, which is something I'm being a classic creative. I was, not terribly good at, because I would just, you just focus on the things you like and you forget about all the other bits, which I needed to really get my head around. And I think I've got better at that, is the planning, and just sort of realizing that without it, my life, could be even more chaotic. By planning, I'm at least, feel like I'm slightly on top of it, and we all know what we're doing, and everybody's kind of on the same page, rather than everything in my head, which is, I think, classically what I've done before. You kind of think you know what you're doing, but then you sort of expect people to read your mind, but of course they can't do that. So it's almost like that is so key. And obviously working on projects, that's one thing that, projects the size that we have, planning is very much a part of everything that we do anyway. It's putting the same principles into sort of just our daily functioning, business life. So that has been a big one for me.
Brilliant. And obviously I wasn't asking that question in the hope that
No, I know you
that
won't.
you gave me the trusted team back. But that's brilliant that is
And it is quite, it has been really useful. I mean, one of the biggest things for me, actually, and I remember going right back to the beginning when I first joined, and I was talking to Steve, and, that was almost like it was a real leap of faith to then employ someone, which is such a small thing. But I remember having a conversation with Steve about it and with you about it, and thinking, gosh, and that for me was a massive, massive step. But without the confidence to know that, I can do this and I should do this, and the reasoning behind it, I probably wouldn't have done it. Do you know what I mean? It's those decisions which have been big game changers in terms of, just how the business has kind of worked, because having that sort of resource to hand, and, Freya's wonderful, and just having that all the time, as part of my team. So it gives you comfort that you've kind of got that, you're building this business, and you need people to build the business. And I think before I was trying to do too many things myself, and having that, taking a leap and committing to employing someone was actually terrifying, but actually the best decision I ever made. So,
and of course now you're answering your own problem by what
yes,
happens next. So the next thing is you need another
I
Freya.
know.
You need
Well,
to
that's
phone
actually
Freya.
what you are talking about, funnily enough. But it's definitely crossing our minds. So absolutely.
Brilliant,
Anyway.
brilliant. It's a constant evolution, isn't it? When you first joined the trust team, it was like, right, I've got no time. I need to clone
Yeah,
myself. So Freya has taken a whole load of, and you're now not struggling to fill her time. And now you're like, now
yeah,
I need another person that's going to,
yeah,
so it's
yeah,
kind of, it's, so the tool that we use for that is called the delegate compound, and it's called the compound for a reason. not a one-off action. It's a, right, let's do it once, and then we do it again, and then we do it again, because each time you go through it, you find new things to delegate, and it builds and builds and builds, and that's what builds into a really big and profitable business that doesn't actually take up huge amounts of your time. And I'm delighted that you've installed the leadership scale up process, which is that kind of that team structure, that process of running the business. Because as a creative, I get that that's not what you came into it with, that creative mindset, not the entrepreneur mindset. So
yes, exactly.
I'm delighted that you've embraced that as well. So for people listening to this that want to find out more about you or your company, where's the best place for them to go to see what you do and follow your projects?
The obvious place, I guess, is Instagram, which I need to work on, by the way.
I think we all do.
Which I'm not really, I'm not visual enough, apparently. Thanks for being told. So that's something I do need to do more of. But Instagram, the website, which is actually, we are undergoing some changes on that at the moment, but that gives you a pretty good idea about us. AllisonCo.com, so ALLISON.co.com. But the actual best way to find out more about us, because I'm a bit of a people person, is just to give me a call, because I quite like to talk to people, and I think people get a real sense of who you are and what you're about much more over a phone call. I think Instagram and a website is a really great tool, obviously for obvious reasons, but I don't think you get a real sense of who you're working with and what we're about until you actually speak to people. And I think goes back to that classic boring old phrase, but people do buy from people. And I hope that people feel that us as a business, which is one of I think our real strengths, is we're good people. We're nice people to deal with, and I think that makes us a good place to come to if you need help on any project.
Amazing. I will put all of those in the show notes. Annie, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you as always. I'm really pleased that I'm really pleased that the business is evolving, and it's absolutely brilliant. So just as a reminder, the Progress in Practice podcast is brought to you by the trusted team who helps professional service firms build a saleable and scalable business. So until next time, keep on making practice in progress. If this conversation resonated, you'll find more support, structure and community inside the trusted team, where ambitious service-based founders come to build businesses that are scalable, saleable, and sustainable. You can find out more at thetrusted.team. And if you're enjoying Progress in Practice, please make sure you follow the show and leave a rating and review. It really helps more founders find these conversations and to bring you better and better guests. So until the next time, keep progressing.